what should Israel have done after October the 7th happened? What should have been their action?
Yeah. So, if you ask me, regardless of international law, militarily, my answer is nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. But
Yes.
there's a lot that had to be done, that needs to be done in terms of truth and reconciliation, ending apartheid, decolonizing here. So, if you ask me, um, Israel should have said, okay, we must end this occupation and apartheid system. We should set up some sort of truth and reconciliation commission based on the South African model, chaired by Desmond Tutu at the time, Bishop Desmond Tutu.
There were questions that lots of people were asking. So a lot of conversation about the Hannibal Directive. What happened on October the 7th? So many, theories would be the right way to say it, where, some people are saying Israel caused so many of their own casualties when they implemented the Hannibal Directive. What's your understanding?
Yeah. So the Hannibal Directive, as far as we had known prior to October 7th, was a military directive basically aimed at preventing the other side from taking Israeli soldiers captive.
Yeah.
What happened on October 7th is that apparently pilots, especially the helicopter pilots, they were given orders to fire at vehicles traveling from inside Israel into Gaza.
Okay.
And
right.
Yeah, on the border. And this is a big deal because many of these vehicles, they were taking civilian captives. So we have a report. It was published by a very well-known Israeli journalist who also writes for the New York Times. He's not a leftist. His name is Ronen Bergman.
Mm-hmm.
And Ronen Bergman reported several months ago, I have the link, I can send you that.
Yes, please.
Around 70 burned cars were discovered by Israeli soldiers on the border between Israel and Gaza after October 7th. And there were there were bodies inside these cars. And most of these bodies were sort of charred, burned beyond recognition.
Yeah.
And this is probably the impact of very, very powerful Israeli air-to-surface missiles or other types of powerful ammunition, which is available to the Israeli Air Force. Mm-hmm. Some of these are probably are Hamas people for sure. But there were definitely Israelis shot, killed, Israeli civilians killed by the Israeli Air Force. And we have one very clear testimony from a mother who was taken hostage, later released in November during the deal with her children. And she said that a Israeli helicopter, shot at the vehicle that was taking them into Gaza and killed her mother. Mm-hmm. So we know that this happened.
Yeah.
I would also add that this doesn't mean that everyone or even that most of the Israeli civilians killed on October 7th were killed by Israel. We have very solid evidence that Hamas also killed many Israeli civilians. I don't know who killed more, but we can just say that Israel killed many of the Israeli captives on October. Many Israeli civilians on October 7th, and so did Hamas.
Yes, and the Hannibal Directive, am I saying it correctly from my little bit of research? Is it what is the principle of it? What's the whole point of the Hannibal Directive so that people understand it a bit better?
So the historical context is that in recent decades, when Israeli soldiers, again,
Mm-hmm.
soldiers, not civilians, that's a new element here, using it when civilians are involved, that when Israeli soldiers were taken captives, for example, one example would be Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier who was taken captive around 15 years ago on the Gaza border by Hamas,
Yes.
or Israeli soldiers taken captive by Palestinian groups during the Lebanon War.
Mm-hmm.
Then this has meant historically, this was followed by, or this led to a prisoner swap deal,
Mm-hmm.
and the ratio or the price was usually several hundred Palestinian detainees for a very small number of Israeli captives,
Mm-hmm.
soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is a lot of reluctance on the Israeli side to let this happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so the directive, which is kind of murky, because Israel will not admit directly that the idea is, just kill the Israeli captives.
Mm-hmm.
That's too explicit for them. They would describe it as a directive with the purpose of just preventing Israel's enemies from taking Israeli soldiers captive.
Okay.
But there's it's a euphemism. I mean, because when you try to do that, and when you use all your military force, to fire at a car, a truck, a group of armed people taking an Israeli soldier captive, you're very likely to kill the Israelis as well.
Yep.
So this is the general historical background.
Okay. Thank you for that. October 7th and the controversy of the rapes, the lies, the truth, the New York Times, trying to do so much research into it, and you find contradictory information. What have you been able to find on this topic, if you're able to
So
talk
once
about
again,
it?
yeah. So once again, I want to be careful here. So I think we can say for certain that there was some gender or sexual violence on October 7th, and also beyond that, I'll give an example in a moment.
Yes.
We also have to add immediately that many of the reports of the Israeli claims are false, or that Israel has completely failed to substantiate its arguments.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, to contextualize, because there's an ongoing genocide in Gaza, we
Yeah.
would also have to add immediately that Israel is using sexual violence against Palestinians, both men and women, and that this is not new, that this has been happening for decades.
Yeah.
Now, regarding October 7th, so first of all, there's this issue of what is generally referred to as gender-based violence. The ways in which some captives were, paraded, presented.
Yeah.
Perhaps if some clothes were removed, or if you
Yes.
just, a group of men parading a woman. So, in terms of a human rights analysis, this would usually qualify as, this would qualify as gender-based violence.
Yep.
Regarding the claims regarding rape, so if you really want to be careful and meticulous, you have to look at, first of all, at first-hand accounts by victims about their own experiences, at forensic evidence, and if CCTV footage, camera video footage is available, of course, that's also very credible. And here, there is a problem. Israel has, for the most part, failed to produce this
Yeah.
kind of evidence to substantiate the stronger claims about rape. And I think that it has absolutely failed to substantiate the claim that there was mass organized, underline both these words, mass organized rape by Hamas, because Israel went beyond just saying that there was sexual violence, that there was rape on October 7th, that it was on a massive scale and organized part of Hamas's plan. Um, as far as I understand, and this also seems to follow from a recent report by Human Rights Watch, which is regarded as a fairly flawed report by Palestinians, cutting Israel a lot of slack. Even Human Rights Watch has not come to this conclusion about mass organized rape.
Yeah.
Forensic evidence, either Israel has it or that almost all of it has been destroyed in October 7th, because a lot of this area, houses were burned down, and not necessarily by Hamas. I'm not saying that Hamas did not burn down buildings, but there was a lot of destruction clearly caused by the use of heavy weapons by the Israeli military, tanks and helicopters. As far as I know, there is no CCTV footage, any video footage of such violence. Now, regarding first-hand accounts by victims, as far as I know, the only thing we have, and this is fairly new, and I do believe the victim is actually an Israeli man claiming that he was raped on October 7th. So my general policy here by default is believe victims. But as far as I know, this is the only first-hand account by a victim. So there is an Israeli claim that that all the victims or all the other victims were simply killed, so that's why they cannot come forward and testify. The one thing I can say here very carefully is that some names that were presented by Israel and also by the New York Times article, which is very problematic, we have denials about these people being rape victims. So 3 names. One of them is an Israeli woman called Gal Abdush. Israel claimed, I think she was also regarded as the woman in the black dress. Her family says, also sort of providing testimony in terms of the time frame when she was texting with them, that she was not raped. That's what her family says. There was some pushback against the family's claim, also perhaps with some, I don't know if it's a racist approach, because they're a conservative Mizrahi family. So some people were saying, look, it's a conservative family, they will not admit to that.
Right.
I'm not buying this argument, but I can also add that 2 additional names that were mentioned by the New York Times article, 2 sisters in Kibbutz Be'eri, the Mizrahi sisters.
Yes.
And we have a denial from the kibbutz spokeswoman, saying that according to the kibbutz, the information available to the kibbutz, these teenagers, these sisters, were not raped. Another thing that I would add is that a woman, Amit Susanna, one of the captives, she was released in the deal late November. Amit Susanna, a 40-year-old woman, has come forward with allegations, detailed allegations of sexual assault during her captivity in Gaza. Again, I believe her. So this is a fairly complex picture, but in any case, Israel's main allegations have not been substantiated. And of course, these main allegations have been used to sort of fuel incitement to genocide. A lot of Israel's public relations advocacy abroad to justify its actions was based on these unsubstantiated claims, which is criminal genocidal incitement.
Torture in the Israeli prisons as standard operating procedure. Do you think the pressure of the global community condemning this action is helping in any way the current prisoners, or is that information not actually reaching the Israeli prison guards and the authority that runs those prisons? Do you think the pressure is helping to some degree?
I think the pressure is helping to some degree because this is such a huge scandal,
Mm,
and torture is I would say, I'm not a legal expert, but it seems to be a more clear cut case in terms of international law. I think it's easier to prove torture, and this means that Israelis can be prosecuted, indicted
mm,
abroad rather easily for torture in
mm,
comparison to other crimes. That's
mm.
my impression, and everyone is or was talking about it after the news broke about
Great.
the torture and rape in
Yes.
Sde Teiman. And there were riots around the base by right-wing Israelis trying to prevent Israeli military police from detaining, interrogating
Mm,
the suspects, the soldiers who
mm,
had apparently committed these crimes. So this was a hot button topic
mm.
here. Everyone who needs to know about it, people involved, they know about it.
Yeah, of course.
I think that this means that for now, some of the more horrendous acts of torture going on in Sde Iman and other detention facilities, Israeli detention facilities, are at least for now off the table.
Okay.
But conditions are still appalling. There is violence, beatings, lack of food, sleep deprivation, and so on. So I would say that in general, Israel is torturing Palestinians. There's always been torture here. People
Yeah.
have died as a result of torture. And Israel has, it's an interesting topic. Israel has a sort of a layered system of sort of legalizing torture with so-called special permits for emergencies. But since October 7th, torture is rampant here, and I would add it's sort of anecdotal in a terrible way that we have evidence from Israeli soldiers who served in Sde Iman that an officer, I think it was a female officer, actually told them when they first came there that they must let go of any compassion for the detainees. There is this recurring notion of theme of just not regarding these Palestinians as human beings, or actually just beyond that, just regarding them as so-called human animals.
Yes.
So first of all, as far as I know, no one in Sde Iman, not one of the detainees, has been charged. So we have
Okay. Yeah.
this idea that the person is presumed
Innocent.
innocent until proven otherwise. But beyond that, and that's a stronger claim, quite a few people have been released from Sde
Yes.
Iman, and
Yes.
these people were tortured, severely tortured. So
Yes.
you can ask Israel if these are all criminals, whatever Israel wants to call them. How come
Yeah.
Israel has released so many of them?
Correct.
So perhaps some of them are Hamas
Must.
operatives, but
Yep.
clearly many are not. And we have testimonies from soldiers that some of these people were old, disabled, amputees. Israel has even arrested people with Alzheimer's. Shocking abuse. So it's very clear that many of these detainees are not even Hamas operatives. Then
Yep.
you go back to this general prevalent notion here in Israeli public opinion that no one is guilty in Gaza, that they are all terrorists. Lots of Israelis saying they should all be wiped out.
One of the young boys that I've been following, and there's been a big campaign, and he's a prisoner, Ahmed Manasra. I don't know if you know much about Ahmed and the fact that, yeah, the way that he was actually put into detention. I think it took a while for them to charge him, but he didn't actually stab anyone, but he was part of, with his cousin who was 15 years old, who did actually kill an Israeli security guard, I think. and maybe another young boy was stabbed by his cousin who survived and was traumatized and all of that. But then Ahmed didn't actually do anything, but he was running around with a knife. Would that be right? In West
So,
Bank?
so I'm not sure actually right now about the details. I mean,
Yep,
whether he was accused of stabbing or not, but that's a general outline
yep,
of
yep.
factual outline here. Yeah.
So I guess people want to know when will this boy be released and the horrific conditions that he's been held in, and that he's been charged like an adult when he was 13 years old and left in solitary confinement for years. And his mental health, Amnesty International had done a major report, was suffering to a great degree. And I think it's been 9 years and he should be released this year. But I'm trying to follow it and it's like radio silence, not much information being released about it. Do you guys hear anything about what is happening with him or his release or?
So there's an ongoing campaign for his release and for raising awareness as to the horrific conditions in which he has been held. So by
Mm,
now he's in his early 20s, right? And
22,
um,
23. Yep.
22, and he suffers from severe mental trauma.
Yes.
I think that since October 7th, and this is a guy from the West Bank, right? He's
Yes,
not from Gaza. He's from the
exactly.
West Bank. I think that right now, this has been sort of, I mean, it was a pretty special case before October 7th, but now
Yep.
we have a huge ongoing emergency in which pretty much every Palestinian detainee in Israeli custody is being tortured. So I think that right now the focus is on the general situation within Israeli prisons. And some Palestinian prisoners, especially those from Gaza, in Neiman, they're being tortured in a way that's even worse than what Ahmed Manasseh has been through. So I think that the focus is on that right now,
Yeah,
on the overall conditions for thousands of Palestinian detainees.
absolutely. And many of them are just as young as Ahmed was when they were detained, aren't they? We're not talking about adults in detention. We're talking about
I
some teenagers as well. And
There are some teenagers for sure. I don't know exactly how many, like 13-year-olds, but there
yes,
are teenagers there for sure, no
for
doubt.
sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. Banning Israel from FIFA and the Olympics. Well, the Olympics didn't quite occur. Any more information on that?
This is going to be a huge struggle, and it's super important. So, of course, this is also based on the struggle against apartheid South Africa, or the fact that Russia has been banned from various
Exactly.
sports competitions. And I support Ukraine, and I fully justify these bans. FIFA and UEFA and the IOC, International Olympic Committee, are much more supportive of Israel, unfortunately. So I would say that the campaign is probably in its infancy, but we may be able to make some progress, perhaps later this year. It's going to be very difficult, but it seems quite clear that the heads of these international committees, they are strongly opposed to that, and I think they don't want to face personal pressure,
Yeah.
international pressure, backlash from Israel and its supporters, and they're trying to kill all these initiatives. But they will have problems continuing to do so if there are arrest warrants against senior Israeli officials, or if the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, rules against Israel that Israel is committing a genocide or that Israel is committing, crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
So I think that if there's progress on the legal front, international tribunals, it's going to become much more difficult for the IOC and for FIFA to continue having Israel as a member. And we may be able to reach, some sort of at least a level playing field in which we can really push strongly for banning Israel.
Yeah.
And this is one of the perhaps two or three most important BDS struggles. If and this has been going on for years, but
Mm-hmm.
if it was considered an uphill battle years ago, at least now my feeling is that with one or two international developments, especially legal developments,
Mm-hmm.
we have a chance here.
And that sort of segues into my next question regarding any updates for the arrest warrants.
Yeah. So the international prosecutor Karim Khan of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, so he is asking the judges to issue arrest warrants for three Hamas leaders and two Israelis. Now, as far as we know, um, two of these Hamas leaders have already been killed by Israel,
Correct.
Haniyeh and Dev. Perhaps
Mm-hmm.
we're not so sure about Dev, but we are sure about Haniyeh.
Mm-hmm.
And two Israeli officials, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. So the judges have to decide on that. In the meantime, the West has intervened for Israel. Um, Germany, I'm not sure about the UK. I think perhaps the UK is not going to do it, but Germany is now asking the court, has submitted its reservations, its objections to indictments of Israeli officials. And as far as I understand, their main claim is not so much that Israel is not committing the crimes, although Germany will probably deny that as well, but that the court doesn't have jurisdiction in this case over Israeli officials.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very powerful attempt by Western powers to thwart this initiative by Karim Khan.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take a while for the court to address all these appeals and submissions. So right now, the West is working hard to delay, if not thwart, the indictment of Israeli officials. So I hope to see positive developments this year,
Soon.
but we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you for that. Um, we had a, a viewer comment saying, it was very refreshing to hear our interview. He really enjoyed it. But one of the comments he did make is about God's chosen people and the victimhood that he feels a lot of Israeli society um, displays. How do you feel about that being an Israeli citizen? Do you see a lot of that?
So God's chosen people, yeah, I mean that would be a sentiment shared by perhaps many, if not most, are religious people or more conservative people.
Mm-hmm.
We are God's chosen people, and
Mm-hmm.
even regarding non-Jews as inferior. But I
Mm-hmm.
would add that this is not the essence of secular historical Zionism. Historically, people like Ben Gurion, Herzl, their approach was more secular, settler colonial, classical European settler colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the more widespread sentiment among both conservative religious people and more liberal secular people, all pretty much all Zionists here, is victimhood. That we are
Mm-hmm.
being persecuted, and that this is simply, that the world or major parts of the world don't like us. Now it's very fashionable to say young Americans, young leftist Americans don't like us. They're anti-Semites, the Western left, and so on. And we're saying that Hamas or Palestinians, they want to annihilate us. I mean, so lots of Israelis, even liberal ones, they don't understand October 7th as um, anti occupation struggle. And of course, you can have actions that are anti occupation, liberation, actions that also amount to war crimes. There's no contradiction here. We know that liberation movements, most if not all liberation movements against Western colonialism in the global South, these movements did commit acts that would be considered war crimes, at least now,
Yes.
considering the progress of international law. So there's no contradiction here. But the thing is that most Israelis will not even recognize this distinction. They will just say that this is simply about killing the maximal number of Jews that they could on October 7th, which is really kind of dumb.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand that Hamas had a political goal in mind on October 7th.
Mm-hmm.
For example, bringing about the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prisons and ending the
Absolutely.
siege on Gaza, and other goals.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a strong sense of victimhood here, even among liberal Zionists. They will say that the Palestinians, or at least people in Gaza, it's very fashionable to say that because of indoctrination, everyone in Gaza, or pretty much everyone, wants to kill us. Hence, this claim that there are no innocent people in Gaza, not even the children, because the children are now absorbing all that hatred, and if they're not killing us now, the children, they will kill us later, try to kill
Mm.
us later.
Yes. And unfortunately, this is not a new sentiment. You know, personally, I heard that over 20 years ago when I visited Israel, or 25 years ago. So it's definitely a way that the civilians think there. There really is so seeped into the way that Israelis are raised. And that's a question I wanted to ask you about. I think we've touched on it before about the brainwashing that occurs from a very young age. And I've watched some of the videos, the Breaking the Silence, where the soldiers talk about how from kindergarten they're being taught certain ideologies and certain ways of thinking. So over to you regarding what do you think in terms of the brainwashing that goes on in the Israeli society is question one. And how did you come out of it is question two. And I know we've touched upon it, but it's almost like a hypnosis. How do you snap out of it?
Yeah, it's very difficult to snap out of it. There's a lot of indoctrination. Some of it is crude, some of it is subtle, and it's hard to notice.
Mm,
I would start with the way in which Arabs are portrayed in Israeli school textbooks.
mm,
I would point to research by Professor
mm,
Nurit Peled,
mm,
because it's also the Israeli government and its supporters. They often talk about incitement in Palestinian textbooks. That's a very popular theme for Israeli Hasbara, Israeli propaganda.
mm,
So first look at Israeli textbooks. They portray Palestinians, Arabs disproportionately as either rather primitive people, peasants, or terrorists.
mm,
Not very often is fully human 3D creatures.
mm,
Um, you know, just like us. 3D complex creatures like
mm,
others, like Israeli Jews.
mhm,
And if you look at literature, popular literature for Israeli children, one example that comes to mind, or actually quite a few. It's often about Palestinians, Arabs as terrorists, and our
mm,
heroes fighting them. Um, so, and beyond that, a lot of Zionist indoctrination, the way in which history is taught here. It's
mm,
basically, we are peaceful, they are not. For example, 1947-48, we were peaceful, we accepted the UN partition plan. Never
mhm,
mind that this was a plan to partition the land basically on a settler colonial basis. Never mind the fact that there was war going on here constantly in 47-48, and that if you uphold international resolutions, Why did Israel get away with the Nakba, with the ethnic cleansing of Palestine? We have international resolutions demanding that Israel allow the refugees to come back. So it's a very, very selective the ways in which they hold on to various international resolutions.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of early Zionist history, basically Jews just trying to work the land and build their own institutions and being attacked by Palestinians. They don't say, they hardly say anything about the fact, or nothing at all about the fact, that there was a policy here. Zionists were purchasing land and driving poor Palestinian farmers out. They were purchasing land from a few wealthy local landowners,
Mm-hmm.
and kicking the farmers who have been living on this land out. And we can go over each major chapter, all the wars, 56, 67, and it's always portrayed as Israel being the passive victim.
Mm-hmm.
And that even 1956, that when Egyptian President Nasser, it began because Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. That was an anti-colonial action. The Suez Canal was controlled by the United Kingdom and France. I mean, why should they control a part of basically of Egypt? And Israel and the UK and France attacked Egypt for that. Israeli textbooks will tell you this was an act of aggression by President Nasser because he blocked the canal.
Yeah.
Ships could not travel through the canal. So in response, there was some sort of legitimate action taken by, I don't know, Israel and its allies. But this is, of course, this is not the main thing. So this is another example of how they portray Israel as a victim.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can elaborate. We can go over other wars and major episodes, but so it's hard to come out of this system. Not to mention
And I've heard that narrative
prevalent
myself.
attitudes in Israeli society. Yeah, I mean, just in general, what people tell you.
I was
we are
taught that
victims.
too. I was taught that in our Jewish little primary school about those wars and how they were started, and that Israel was the victim and the winner at the end of the day after it was attacked. So that's the history, I guess, that we were taught, and that's the narrative that, dare I say, has been rewritten. The truth has been rewritten.
Yeah. So and two famous quotes from Golda Meir. She was very sanctimonious, former prime minister of Israel during the '73 war. I don't remember the precise wording, but she said that we will never forgive the Arabs for making us fight their children or kill their children, something like that, very sanctimonious.
Mm-hmm.
And also something along the lines of the Arabs hate us more than they love their children.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I've
so
heard something
this is,
like that. I have actually heard that myself.
yeah. So this is so sanctimonious.
It is.
And she was a secular liberal Zionist, Labor Party person. So this gives you some idea.
Yeah. So question 2, how, Ofer, did you come out of what was such a deep-rooted brainwashing that started from birth, even if your parents weren't like that and you may have heard something different at home? The fact that the whole society and all the, everyone's indoctrinating you in the same way in schools, ads on television, the army, everything, the propaganda. How do you start to see through it? I know I've asked you it before, but I still think it's, because you are a minority that's been able to see through it.
So a potential way out, maybe you can call it a gateway drug, is the 1967 occupation. I don't think this is probably no longer relevant with all the mess that we have around us, but at the time, Um, when Israel was controlling the West Bank and the Gaza Strip directly and building settlements there,
Hmm.
there's never been consensus support for that.
Yeah.
And among the Israelis who are more liberal, including liberal Zionists, there's always been a great deal of resentment towards that project,
Hmm.
the settlement project. And when you look at the construction of settlement, the expansion of settlements, Israeli military violence there in the occupied territories, um, some people become critical, um, even if they don't become anti-Zionist and completely disillusioned.
Yeah.
Um, so this was the thing for me, being critical of the '67 occupation.
Hmm.
Beyond that, perhaps not too many people go beyond that, but I think um, this could be the first step. This is the first step for some Israelis for many Israelis who become dissidents.
Yes.
Or at least in past years, they were looking at the '67 occupation and saying, there's something wrong here. Yeah, maybe I can understand that this really is colonialism. Again, only in the West Bank and Gaza Strip context, even before coming to any major scathing conclusion about Israel within the '67 borders.
Hmm.
And then perhaps some people take it from there and they become more critical of
Yes.
Israel as a whole.
Mm.
Perhaps if they're sensitive to this racist talk that we
Hmm.
just discussed all around us within Israeli society.
Yeah.
Um, Perhaps if they lived abroad and saw that it can be different elsewhere, that
Yes.
racism may not be so rampant elsewhere, at least not explicitly.
Yes.
So I mean, you tell me. I'm sure there's a lot of racism in Australia, especially among the more privileged white people.
Yeah.
But I'm also sure it's much more subtle. It's politically incorrect to be as vulgar about and open about such genocidal incitement
Yes.
um, as it is, yeah,
It's
in
been
Israel.
quite shocking to watch some of the things that are said in Israeli parliament, and some of the speeches that the politicians will so openly admit, and the TikToks that the soldiers are, putting on in Gaza, the um, various meeting points where Israelis get together and talk about how, the racist comments, and they own them. They're proud of them, and they actually call themselves racist, is what I've seen. Um, it's quite shocking coming from a country that does not exist um, in that way. So it's very different, and I guess that's why I'm so surprised that some people are able to actually, is it wake up? Is it come out of a deep hypnosis? Like what is schooling like in Israel? It's all. Is there any secular?
So there are various educational streams in Israel. The main one, it's called the General State Education
Hmm.
stream, which is not religious.
Hmm.
That's classical secular Zionism, things that
Okay.
we've been discussing here.
Yeah.
For example, you don't pray. I never prayed at school.
Hmm.
You don't wear a kippah.
Hmm.
But there's all this Zionist indoctrination, Golda Meir style, okay, Golda Meir
Yes.
style,
Yes.
all around you.
Hmm.
Then there is this Zionist religious education stream, um, which in which there is much more indoctrination around religious fanaticism, much more explicit hatred.
Hmm.
Um, Inside these schools, you would see more rabbis coming to lecture, including genocidal incitement nowadays. For
Hmm.
sure, it used to be more subtle decades ago, but right now it's quite
It's
crude.
yes.
And on top of that, you have some various ultra-Orthodox streams, which are not official or semi-official, but still funded by the state because we have this sort of twisted system here in which the ultra-Orthodox parties they get government funding for their education systems, which are not very good. I mean, many of these schools, the Orthodox schools, they produce people that are hardly proficient and competent at basic skills such as
Wow.
math and English. Um, but I would say that there's a lot of racism in these schools and yeshivas as well. And you also have the Arab education stream, schools for the Palestinian
Okay.
citizens of Israel, and
So
these
they
are
go
they
to
are also
separate
they also
schools.
have they go to the separate schools, and they also have to learn history from a perspective that is quite pro-Israel, and they are heavily monitored by the Israeli government, including Shabak. And we know for a fact that in some cases, Palestinian teachers in these schools, I mean, they're monitored by the Shabak, the General Security Service. In some cases, they get questioned,
Wow.
interrogated if they are perceived as having taught something too critically.
Hmm.
Um,
So my question, and I remember we cut out last time about Mayich Baruchin, if I'm saying it correctly, that he,
yeah,
Mayich Baruchin, he's a Jewish Israeli teacher,
yeah.
and he started to maybe go slightly outside the curriculum by talking about Palestinians the way that he explained it, because I've seen a few of the documentaries, as human beings that might not want to live under an occupation. And
Yeah.
a few posts, scandalous as it was seen at the time, posts about October the 7th or about even before that, again, the occupation and the way that Palestinian people are being treated. So he is a Jewish Israeli citizen, and yet he was put in prison for at least 2 weeks, I think.
Several days.
Several
Not sure
days,
about
right.
weeks.
Okay, for some reason I thought it was about 2 weeks, in which he was also threatened that his daughter was going to be raped, and his family would be hurt or harmed or killed. I'm not sure to the extent of the threats by the Israeli military and the police, the Israeli police. So this is how a Jewish Israeli teacher was treated for stepping outside the curriculum, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. Do you know of any others that were treated in a similar way, or was he sort of an example, was made an example?
Okay, so first of all, I forgot to add that there are some. There's also possible. We also have some smaller independent schools, so-called democratic schools.
Okay.
There's also a bilingual Arabic Hebrew school
Mm-hmm.
system, but these are smaller, and these are much better schools. I mean, these are the sort of safe havens for parents who want to send their children to schools that provide humanistic education. Meir Baruchian, he's a civics teacher. He has a PhD. And as far as I know, he was arrested not for anything taught to at school, but for posting online on social media.
Mm-hmm.
For example, saying that, and he's correct, that rape is something that has been committed by Israel since 1948. That was during the first weeks of the war and genocide in Gaza. I would say that that specific period was the exception to the rule regarding our privilege as
Mm-hmm.
Jewish Israeli citizens. We're still privileged. And I think that nowadays it's possible for Meir, for me, for others to post these things. There was so much hysteria here during the first weeks of the war and genocide that they arrested Meir. And yes, he was threatened.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, to be precise, he was arrested, as far as I know, for what he has been posting
Mm-hmm.
online.
Okay.
I think that as a teacher, he's considered a very professional teacher. He's anti-indoctrination. He encourages his
Mm-hmm.
students to think for themselves, to push back, to criticize.
Mm-hmm.
He is what a teacher should be, and I'm
Definitely.
sure there are quite a few other teachers within the system. And occasionally we do hear of a a teacher who's critical of the Israeli government, but prior to October 7th, and this is a fairly new phenomenon, it used to be different,
Mm-hmm.
but in the past decade or so, there has been an orchestrated backlash to silence teachers,
Yes.
critical teachers. For example, if a teacher or school headmaster invites Israeli dissidents, even groups that are fairly soft, such as breaking the silence,
Mm-hmm.
there may be an organized campaign against this invitation, threatening, trying to pressure right-wing officials within the Ministry of Education, may pressure that specific school into disinviting these speakers. So there's an
Mm-hmm.
orchestrated attempt um, at trying to prevent critical voices from speaking to Israeli school children.
Yeah. What should Israel have done after October the 7th happened? What should have been their action?
Yeah. So if you ask me, regardless of international law, militarily, my answer is nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. But
Yes.
there's a lot that had to be done, that needs to be done
Yeah.
in terms of truth and reconciliation, ending apartheid, decolonizing here. So if you ask me, um, Israel should have said, okay, we must end this occupation and apartheid system. We should set up some sort of truth and reconciliation commission based on the South African model, chaired by Desmond Tutu
Mm-hmm.
at the time, Bishop Desmond Tutu.
Yes.
And then victims, because we should have sympathy for all individual victims, Jews and Palestinians alike.
Mm-hmm.
Victims can come forward and testify, and we can have we can learn something, we can have some sort of closure here. I would also say that we can also use international law. I'm never against the use of international law. So if people committed war crimes,
They
okay,
need to
you
be
can
held
pursue
accountable.
indictments. That should have been the response.
Yes.
In terms of the legal perspective, I'm not a legal expert, but there are quite a few legal scholars saying that Israel had no right to strike Gaza because Gaza is still territory occupied by Israel, and that an occupying power has no authority to strike its occupied territory. Even more important, there's the issue of what Israel was allowed to do if once it decided to attack Gaza. Okay, so first of all, there's the legal question of whether it's legal in the first place. To opt for a military response in Gaza. On top of that, um, we have the genocide being committed. Uh, um, Genocide on top of crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, clearly an attempt to drive out the Palestinians by making Gaza completely uninhabitable. Um, so, so this gives you some idea of the things that I oppose and the things that I support. So basically, I want after October 7th, what we should have had is an awakening among Israelis, supporting accountability, for Palestinian perpetrators as well, and for Israeli victims having their own personal grievance recognized, but decolonizing this whole place, ending occupation, apartheid, all forms of settler colonialism here.
Yeah.
I know it sounds like a pipe dream, of course,
No, it
but so
doesn't.
if people reject, but if people reject my own recommendations for what Israel should have done after October 7th, so we're still left with this. This should be obvious. Don't commit a genocide. Don't commit crimes against humanity.